the EscapeGoat Podcast, a podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Hello, welcome to the EscapeGoat Podcast, episode 35, and this is actually the last episode of the kind of like protracted first season of this, because I've been doing these since March 2020, and we've got 35 episodes out of it. And as I mentioned in the last episode, the Paris When It Sizzles episode, I'm going to record the odd one or two over the summer, but I'm essentially giving myself July, August off actually having to release them. So going to be back in the autumn with new episodes. So stay tuned to the Twitter, Libsyn, wherever you get it, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, for the new episodes when they come out. But this will be the last one that comes out for a little while, bar the odd summer special. You never know what mood I might get into. But I'd like to welcome back, after just a few weeks, John.
Hello.
I've got John back on because we're basically going to finish what we started, because we, I think about 4 weeks ago now, we got together and we started talking about the current series, or the just concluded series now, of Inside Number 9, the sixth series of Inside Number 9. And we talked about the first three episodes, which were Wuthering Heist, Simon Says, and Lip Service. And we decided to reconvene and talk about the last three, and then talk about where we see the our sort of rankings of those episodes, as well as our sort of general thoughts on the series. So anyone who wants the first part of this conversation, that's episode 33 of the podcast. You can easily find that there, and I'll probably put them on a playlist on YouTube together. John, would you remind me what your, because we did a sort of top three of three when we did it last time. What how did you rank the first three of this series?
Top three of three. So do you know what? I can't actually remember.
Perfect.
So I'm going to give you my top three, and then we can go back and figure out whether it's the same top three. I'm pretty sure I went Simon Says, Wuthering Heist, Lip Service.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that with Simon Says being your highest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you did too. And I went Lip Service highest, Wuthering Heist, and then Simon Says at the bottom. I remember that was our main disagreement there. Although I think we pretty much thought they were all pretty good. Really, I mean, we didn't find a stinker in the bunch, so to speak. I don't think. Although I think it's not to be too fanish, but I think it's an open debate whether Inside Number 9 has even had a bad episode yet. Really, at least in my opinion, it might have had less good ones, but I think that's kind of that's the water they tend to swim in. I
mean, sure, like we can get into a semantic argument if you like about the meaning of less good.
Yeah, that'll occupy the back half of this podcast. That'll be in one of the breakout rooms. Welcome back to the EscapeGoat seminar. Your
options are good and bad. Less good also.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll find out where these stand on this scale then. So this was on about, I guess, about 3.5 weeks ago now. But the fourth episode of the series was Hurry Up and Wait. Can I get your initial thoughts on that, please, John?
Yeah, Hurry Up and Wait. It's I really enjoyed this one. It's, I think, as we should say, obviously they've been doing a podcast as well, and I think both David and I have been listening to them. So to an extent, I guess we have a bit of their insider knowledge, and I know that they were conscious of this being of it being an industry episode, basically. And normally they would kind of spread them out, but with Simon Says, they've kind of ended up with 2 industry episodes in a season, which they wouldn't normally have done because of the various changes in shooting, etc. So it's very much an insider industry episode. And obviously we've talked before about how obsessed they are with kind of stuff going on behind the scenes and making television about making television. And this falls squarely into that category. I mean, it doesn't get much more than being in a caravan on location for a TV drama, but obviously with the usual twists and originality and I guess, a certain level of an eye for detail, an eye for the kind of the quirkier side of things that can happen in those situations. So yeah, lot to like in this, particularly. I think the Adrian Dunbar performance, I think, is great in this. There is now. I was thinking. I think it's unique in the sense that they have done an episode before which has, scare quotes, real people in it, and it's Deadline, where they have Stephanie Cole playing Stephanie Cole.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But we're now entering into a world where everyone else is playing a fictional character, but we have one real-world person. Do you see what I mean? So I think it was interesting for that you had the Adrian Dunbar character surrounded by everyone else.
Well, and Deadline was kind of a special mimicking. Well, you could say the world of Deadline was set in a world where the Inside Number 9 also exists. Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton were playing themselves, as well. So it's kind of that felt not organic, but that felt okay because it was a special, I guess. Whereas this is muddying the water slightly. I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Because one of my first, so firstly, when I was watching this episode, it was one of those occasions in fiction where you see a scenario that you just had never thought through that must happen, but it's so weird that it almost takes you out of the moment. Because when I was listening to them afterwards, they were talking about how in real life location filming, people's homes, in this case a caravan, but people's private homes and stuff are sort of requisitioned as green rooms, and that was so weird that I was just like, wow, I've never ever thought about the logistics of that, but I guess that probably does happen. And then they talked a little bit about it in their BBC Sound show as well. But so that was my first thought. But then I think I messaged you briefly about this because we've been trying to stay off the messages and leave the chat fairly fresh for this. But I watched a show that I find really, really interesting, and I certainly loved in the noughties and find very interesting to this day, is Extras, the Ricky Gervais sitcom. His follow-up to The Office. And actually, I think that's probably going to end up being the topic of an scapegoat in the future, because I think there's loads of I think actually maybe especially for critics of Ricky Gervais, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff in Extras, which is where, because you could argue, we'll go into this in more detail in the future, but you could argue Extras is where all the problems with Ricky Gervais become unignorable, basically, gradually over a period. But what I was just thinking was immediately this is like an episode of Extras, not just in the setting, but kind of I guess you might say the slightly cruel but verging on classist sometimes tone of it. It's like if Extras did I guess it's a bit like if Extras did a Halloween special, actually. It's kind of like it's verging into it's Extras as a horror movie,
Yes, and other kind of genre-bending definitions. Yeah, I guess you could say that. There's definitely that element about it. And watching it again for the second time, I was thinking this first 20 minutes, it basically is. The first 20 minutes is exactly that. It's it's a kind of comedy of errors set on a film set. That's basically it. And thrusting this poor young actor who wants to give his character a name, but in fact he's the Bobby rather than Bobby, and he's trying to do a really good job, and he makes one offhand remark to the star, and suddenly he's absolutely destroyed by this capricious actor. And I love that moment as well. That turn is fabulous. I think that the performance from Adrian Dunbar there, when Reece Shearsmith says to him, "Oh, another policeman," and Adrian Dunbar just goes, "Sorry," and it's that moment. It's as quick as that. The whole thing pivots on that one word, and then suddenly he goes into the whole thing about how the two characters style their hair in different ways, and it's lovely.
Yeah. I love the way all the malice, though, in the way he then treats Shearsmith's character after that, is all swept under the rug. It's all not subtle exactly, but the way in which he slowly robs him of all his autonomy and lines and input into the scene it's all, none of that's played with a sneer or anything. It's all like just kind of you see how he goes about it. In fact, I don't think you really know whether that's just how he would have treated him anyway. No matter the accidental slight.
Yeah, exactly. Up to that point, I think I felt like this was one of the maddest episodes I'd ever seen. In that the setup of the first 5 to 10 minutes of you know where you are with the with James, with the actor, you know where you are with that scenario, but suddenly you've got this. I don't know. You've got this woman who is acting like an infant, who has a wax moustache on her lip. Just staring at him. It's incredibly strange. And then Mrs. Doyle turns up and asks if he wants a cup of tea, and it's weird.
And Steve Pemberton on, I must say, quite threatening form.
Yeah, absolutely, really threatening form. Actually, I really enjoyed his performance. It felt like he was really going for that. I had a phrase that kept bouncing around my head when they were having the conversation about, we get up for early starts too, and etc. And he says, "Are you taking the piss?" And I had this phrase bouncing around my head, which was, "Don't give me any more of that working class hero crap." And I couldn't identify it. And about 3 p.m. this afternoon, I was like, it's Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
And that's the line that kept coming back to me, is this kind of working class hero crap. That's kind of the route they're going down with Pemberton's character, isn't it?
This is definitely one of the ones where a bit of Royston Vasey's creeping back in as well. I think this is. I was thinking that in terms of I can't remember the daughter's name, but the daughter in the dressing gown. There's a bit of Tubbs to her, and there's a bit of the kind of local shop alienation in the entire setting, really, isn't there? There's a bit of that. I mean, actually, even down to the fact that Reece Shearsmith in The League of Gentlemen played kind of these, these lost characters who are kind of, adrift, have sort of been shipwrecked on the coast of these strange local towns.
Yeah.
There's a bit of that in there, isn't there? A bit of that in the DNA.
Yeah, there definitely is. It's it's about being on location. It's about being away from an urban area. And not just in terms of the film that they're making, but in terms of not to put it too crassly, but you're using a caravan, you're using a static home, so the type of family that would live in a static home are going to be different from a type of family who don't, and they're possibly going to be in an area where there are lots of static caravans, and coming from Cornwall as I do, obviously there are quite a lot of those caravan parks, and they tend to be out on the fringes. They tend to be out on the edge of the county and near the coast, so that they cater to holidaymakers. But weirdly, if you had to live, I mean, it's there right in the beginning when Reece Shearsmith says, "Oh, it's like going on holiday," and she just looks at him like, "You're mad. I've never been on holiday. This is as far away from a holiday you could possibly be." That was a really nice touch.
It's funny as well, isn't it? Because there's the sort of commodification of working class tragedy is kind of why they're there, really, isn't it? Because I mean the presence of Adrian Dunbar. This is going to become this child that went missing, and that's quite a sort of famous incident from that area is going to become a packaged BBC One evening experience for middle class viewers. That's essentially what they're doing there. A cheap holiday in other people's misery, you might say.
Yeah, and I think that was there was a really interesting conversation they opened up there. And I know they were liberally using Jeff Pope's name, and that's what he does. He's a real screenwriter, and that's his bread and butter. But there was an element there where I felt that they were slightly looking at us and questioning whether this trend that we have for misery tourism or whatever you want to call it, whether that's okay, because they're in telling these true life stories, there are real people, there are real victims, there are real people who lived through it and were affected. And I guess there is a conversation, probably by people more scholarly than myself, about whether it's right to make films about the Yorkshire Ripper, whether it's right to make TV shows about child murders. It's that really happened, and I think that's an interesting thing that they were bringing out there by choosing it by choosing. So they weren't making Broadchurch, basically. They weren't making Broadchurch, which is, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think is based on any real life scenario. But they're
not that I'm aware of.
But they're very strongly making this something about something that happened, and the fact that they're, filming it in the same place that it happened. I feel that there's definitely a question being asked of the audience there about whether we think that's okay or not.
Well, the amateur detective angle as well, they've already riffed on fanatical podcasters and stuff earlier in the series. The fact that even Shearsmith's character, he literally turns detective towards the end, doesn't he? In a sort of frustrated attempt to dig under what he sees as all these clues that he's gathered, and present it like an almost like Poirot-esque kind of drawing room solution, which ends in him getting punched out by Pemberton. But it's definitely edging at those darker areas. There was one thing I was thinking. Because I think last episode I talked about some of the. I've already mentioned the League of Gentlemen. Maybe some of the slightly more dated or lazy tropes that the creators of this are sometimes guilty of falling back on a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have one to say a little bit about the last night of the Proms actually when we get to that. But this is a variant really. Did you think playing around with the daughter's gender was also a bit? I don't really know what to say. A bit gauche. It just kind of using the horror of a woman who's secretly a man. Reminiscent a little bit of kind of Barbara from The League and things like. It's kind of using that as a kind of innate grotesquerie. Apart from all the other Arrested Development things about a character like that. Sort of adult child woman. Is that? I'm not saying they crossed a line or anything like that, or not, at least not as far as I would draw it. But there was there's something. I suppose the thing is with horror, and I think this is explicitly like a mini horror movie. I tend to sort of give a little bit more leeway in that sort of stuff because I think horror, it's a bit trite, isn't it? But I think horror should be a bit transgressive. Should be a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that for me, I'm not sure those questions arose for me simply because I didn't believe it. It's clearly a woman. It's clearly a girl who, the actor, the character is clearly a girl. So for me, it said more about James's stupidity or blindness to the reality of the situation that he was in, rather than making, coming anywhere near a line or crossing a line or anything in terms of its attitude towards gender. So it didn't really cause a problem for me, just because, and maybe this is the wrong thing to take, maybe this is not what they wanted, but I just kind of thought, well, he's being an idiot because that's clearly not a boy, so therefore that it's clearly not the child, and therefore this is clearly not the twist, this is clearly not the ending.
Yeah. No, I think that's defensible. I just thought I'd bring it up really because, as I say, we'll bring it up later again when it hit me a bit like that. One thing I thought, which is maybe more just a sort of comedy nerds thing than anything else, is that it's getting weird in the same way that Steve Coogan has aged into Alan Partridge. It's weird seeing Pauline McLean now when she's basically getting towards sort of Mrs. Doyle age.
She is Mrs. Doyle age. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
I was actually taken aback when I saw a bit of a sidebar here, but I saw a picture of Pauline McLean when she was doing Father Ted, in sort of 96 or whatever, and I was actually quite taken aback by how glamorous the young Pauline McLean was. She's a very nice looking woman, and obviously the Mrs. Doyle, performance and makeup and everything is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was nice to see her anyway, wasn't it? It's like, we really are getting to the point where it's probably easier to list people who haven't been on Inside Number 9 from the world of kind of British and Irish TV acting.
Yeah, it's a shorter list now. we're in Series 6. It's a shorter. Imagine if you haven't been asked though. Imagine if you haven't been asked, or your agent hasn't put you up for an Inside Number 9, and you're someone like. Imagine you're Lee Mack, and no one's asked you yet to do Inside Number 9, and you kind of understand why, but you really want to be in it.
I can see them getting Lee Mack.
I could see them getting Lee Mack at some point, but yeah, you see what I mean? It must be a kind of strange situation for British comedians now that there is kind of this staple with a rotating cast, in the same way that jobbing actors would always, would do the bill, and Holby City, it feels like Inside Number 9 is now that kind of the same sort of thing for British comedy actors.
Yeah, well, it's like I think we touched on this before, didn't we? It's because things like that and Doctor Who and to an extent things like The Bill as well are kind of like thinly disguised, well, more or less thinly disguised anthologies, aren't they? Even something like The Bill with regular characters. The reason so many people end up in that is there's basically Case of the Week, and you get a load of new cast in all the time, and it's kind of there's a reason people cycle through those shows so quickly. It actually reminds me of another joke in Extras where one of Andy Millman's lowest moments is someone just incredulously saying, "You haven't even been in The Bill." I wondered actually, because this most of these episodes, I think all these episodes have had at least some sort of twist in them. Yeah, I haven't really identified the one with it. There's not been one like Love's Great Adventure, which kind of doesn't have a twist this series that I've identified. We could talk a bit about Last Night at the Proms, actually. That might partial exception, but obviously there's a lot going on there. What did you make of the twist in Hurry Up and Wait? Because it is one with a big sting, isn't it?
Yeah, fine. Liked it. Yeah, it did get an ooh from me. But again, not a massive shock, because like they seeded it very, very well. The idea of her saying I'm celebrating a birthday, and then they dropped into it that it would have been Ryan's birthday, and I think I just started piecing it together from there, and I was like, well, it sounds like this kid might have been abducted by this girl when they were young, but I didn't quite expect the graphic image of the skeleton hand poking out from underneath the doll. I think was slightly grim and shocking, and a lovely little look on her face as well, on the actress's face, as she kind of pulled that. Yeah, no, it is only me that knows about this. No one else does. I thought that was a really, really, really lovely touch, a really lovely moment from Donna Preston. There we go. That's her name.
That was lovely. Darkly lovely. I thought it's. You've still not seen Psychoville, have you?
No.
We talked about that. There's most fans of Psychoville know what I'm talking about instantly. But there's a character in that played by Dawn French who is obsessed with a doll, which in that case is just a doll, but she thinks it's more than that. She thinks it's a human baby, and they get loads of grotesquerie out of that. So it felt like a slight nod or return of that. It actually, I've seen all these episodes at least twice now, and one thing that it does make the episode nice to rewatch is having that doll in it from the early stages. Once you know what it is undoubtedly a creepy rewatch. It was, and I suppose just using the power of, that's the kind of the old comedy kind of cliche, isn't it? That dead baby jokes are the kind of the most potent but also off the table form of humour. This is kind of a dead baby shaggy dog story in a way, isn't it?
In a way, yeah.
That's kind of what they went for with this one. I thought it was we'll do our rankings at the end, but I enjoyed it, and I think the darker feelings it gave me were appropriate to the subject matter, and what they were going for. I think the way it left me feeling fairly troubled and uncomfortable, it meant they were doing the job well, really, and the claustrophobia of the setting as well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here, and I think we're definitely going to come back to this with Last Night at the Proms, is you have to ask yourself about the perspective and about the target. People talk a lot about targets when you're making jokes. Now, we know with Inside Number 9 they aren't necessarily making jokes, but it's who is the target of it, at whose expense are you laughing, or why are you being invited to laugh, and at who? At whom? At who? Who are you being invited to laugh at? And I felt that with this, by the very end, you weren't being asked to laugh at anyone. Actually, you were entirely sympathetic to absolutely everyone in that caravan. Everyone who was in that caravan was a victim of their circumstance to some extent, from the parents and the child and the actor. And Adrian Dunbar is kind of outside of it all, just pulling focus. So I think you're right. I didn't feel uncomfortable at the scenario that was being presented to me, because I don't think we were being, at any point we were being asked to find the idea of an abducted baby inherently amusing or in any way, entertaining. I think it was played very well. It was very nuanced and very subtle and very sophisticated way of dealing with that scenario without making an audience uncomfortable. Speaking for myself personally, anyway.
Yeah, no, I thought that offset some of the. I think I was talking to someone online the other day about the, I think sort of circa 2007 movie Eden Lake, which was the horror movie British horror movie where two middle class teachers go to, I think it's like the Midlands, and they basically get terrorised by a gang of like almost like feral working class kids. I think Owen Jones talks about that in his book Chavs. Actually, it's one of the sort of pieces of noughties pop culture that he says, like indicates for him a kind of a low of like class hatred, basically, the underclass hatred in Britain. I thought it played around with some of that feel without being too exploitative and one-sided, and without just reveling in the poor people equal horrible tendency of some horror.
Yeah, and I think the key there is Rhys Shearsmith's character. He's, we can see right through him. Not only is he, like, at best he's a jobbing actor, at worst he's, as they say, a glorified extra. Like, he's got no more status or power than the people who live in that caravan. He is just in his, he's in his own caravan, but it's different.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, we'll move on. We'll move on to how do you plead, which is the penultimate episode of the series. And this is also them bringing back Derek Jacobi, or having him on screen for the first time, because I think we mentioned in our episode about the first 5 series of Inside Number 9, he played the director, voiceover commentator in The Devil of Christmas, which is one of my very, very favourite episodes of the show. And so I think he's the first returning actor on it, apart from Shearsmith and Pemberton, which
he is. Yeah.
Always good to see Derek Jacobi.
Well,
it was well, I know he owes you money.
Well, it depends. Like, midnight looking outside my bedroom window. That's not a good time to see Derek Jacobi.
He's still doing that, is he?
He just
like an owl.
He is just for the muse of fire. He won't shut up. It's dreadful.
It was kind of weird for me seeing him in this, because do you remember I was saying I went through that phase of watching Vicious around about sort of January, February. So I've had quite a lot of Derek Jacobi this year already, and quite a lot of him kind of camping it up with Ian McKellen.
Yeah, I've already mentioned to you that I've watched through all of Cadfile in the last few months as well. So going from Cadfile to this, it's quite a leap.
Yeah, it was. Did this one work well for you?
It did, yeah. You know what? The first time I watched this, I think my instinct was, oh, very good, lads. Yeah, well done, very clever. I can see what you've done there. It was a bit like Wuthering Heist for me, where it was like, okay, you're really showing your credentials on the sleeve now, and I did Dr. Faustus at A-level, so I know exactly what you're drawing from. And actually, on the second watching of it, possibly because I knew the scenario and knew where it was all going to go, I really, really enjoyed watching it the second time, and I just went along with it. And I think part of the beauty of it is, apart from all the twisty turniness, and obviously it's on a very basic level, it's Faustus, it's making a pact with the devil, with a twist. But I also felt like, in what other genre or life could you create half an hour of visually beautiful dark television with Derek Jacobi playing the lead role, where you could do a pact with the devil story that includes a joke about Mr. Mistopheles from Cats? I thought that was just absolutely superb. I mean, sometimes I think we said with the referees a wanker episode, I wouldn't be surprised if they came up with linesman Manelli before they wrote the episode and they just worked backwards from that. And I just think with this one, I think they thought, oh, Mr. Mistopheles, wouldn't it be funny to call the devil Mr. Mistopheles? Right, we'll work backwards from that. Off we go.
Yeah, well, of course, with Cats coming out just before the pandemic, and some will have it as causing the pandemic. That's more in the popular consciousness.
Bats, now David. Bats. You misheard.
No, I saw Cats. I know what I saw.
Jacoby's one of the only loves not to be in that, isn't he? As well.
He is. Ian McKellen's in it, though.
McKellen and Dench.
Vicious royalty. I generally like this one. This one felt very like a sort of a Tales from the Crypt Keeper. Really, I was going to say Tales of the Unexpected, but kind of it could be one of those classic horror anthology kind of shows, or I suppose like one of the kind of Amicus portmanteau things that they're the League guys are obviously enthralled to. Have attributed many times. It felt like that kind of thing. When the lift kind of plummets at the very end, I was kind of looking at it because I think the last shot is like the lift shaft and there's some flickers at the bottom and stuff, and I think they're just meant to be electric flickers, but I was kind of like I was almost surprised it didn't just literally descend into fire. I thought they were going to get, and that would have been fine with the tone that they'd arrived at. I wouldn't have minded that.
Yeah, they'd already got there, and I like it's Guillaume Morales as well directing this one, who we've talked about before, who's directed some of my favourite episodes, and I think some of yours as well. And they've worked with him. Well, they've only worked with 2 directors during this series, with Guillaume Morales and Matt Lipsey. And I not that I want to play that card, but I think the ones that are going to end up being my favourites are the ones that Guillaume Morales has directed rather than the other ones, and that may be coincidental. But yeah, I think he's a wonderful visual director, and I think clearly he's worked with these guys a lot now, just in terms of them being on the same page and him being able to bring to the screen, exactly what they want. Exactly what they've imagined, and then some as well. So I think it's really beautifully directed. The art direction's lovely, and it looks great, and it's got these lovely little flourishes and touches, and a dream sequence.
Yeah, that felt new. It didn't. I couldn't think of another episode that's done that kind of thing.
I think it is. I think a full on we're with a character. Having a dream sequence. Obviously, you've got the 12 Days of Christine, which is happening within her subconscious. So that's kind of not quite the same thing, is it?
I suppose it shows how broad the sort of world, within their own fascinations and preoccupations and sort of style, that how broad the world they've sketched is, that they can do quite. Sort of like quasi-realistically grounded episodes like Lip Service and Hurry Up and Wait, and then they can do good old-fashioned Pat with the Devil stuff within the same series and it not feel too jarringly out of place.
Yeah.
It's interesting, actually. I remember on our previous episode about the first 5 series, I was talking to you about how I'd noticed for the first 5 series, there's the final one is almost always the supernatural one. And whether they stumbled into doing that or realised they were doing it after a few series and then did it consciously, I don't know. But this series is interesting in the sense that that's kind of that's these last 2, really, isn't it? Arguably, this one explicitly. Did you think Steve Pemberton's eyes glowing too much, too little?
No, fine, absolutely fine with that. I thought that was a really nice moment actually, just before they did that. It was you could tell this was. We said we're not. I said I'm not going to play this game of what was written during lockdown and what wasn't. But just that line of, "Do you think everything will be back to normal soon?" I think my eyes are beginning to adjust. I thought it was a really, really lovely way of just actually reaching out and kind of going, things are really weird, aren't they? Kind of wish they would go back to normal. I think that was a really nice, subtle way of doing that.
Yeah, I'd missed that one. Yeah, I suppose that is acknowledging its time and place the most that any of these are going to, I suppose, unless the ones that they're holding back for this Series 7. I saw the other day they're going to be filming Series 7 later this year, by the way, so that will be...
Oh, nice. Okay.
That'll be with us, I guess, middle of next year, I guess,
yeah.
Something like that, but that'll be so interesting to see what they've kept back for that, especially as we said last time, given that we know that they're mixing and matching a bit from the pre and post pandemic or during pandemic writing stuff. Yeah, it can be really interesting to see that. I thought this one left me with less to say than some of the others because they're just very much, they're enjoying having Jacoby there. They are doing that kind of, clever and twisty, but essentially quite conventional morality tale with a sting. There's nothing too madly subversive in this one, really. Either stylistically or kind of, it's quite traditional, arguably. And it sort of feels like it could belong to a straight, a quote unquote straighter anthology show in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very much in their wheelhouse, isn't it? It's, it doesn't look at all out of place. If you were to look at the synopsis of that, it's not at all out of place for what they tend to be obsessed with.
Yeah, and you imagine, like, we were talking before about whether there's episodes in which Pemberton or Shearsmith should maybe step back and let someone else play them. You can't really begrudge Pemberton playing the devil, could you? I don't know if he's ever gone quite that far in terms of his sort of more gothic stuff, but that must be a fun thing when you've decided you're going to do a Satan episode. That must be a fun thing to maybe like draw lots for, so to speak.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember thinking while I was watching it, like towards the beginning of the episode, I was thinking, ooh, I wonder when Jacoby came on board, because this feels like actually the two-hander here is Stephen Reese, and Steve is playing Webster. And I swear, everybody, I did think that before I listened to the podcast, and they confirmed that, in fact, that was the case. And Pemberton was going to play Webster, and then Jacoby came on board, and then they said, okay, well, you can be the devil.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really interesting because you could sort of see how it could definitely be written for Pemberton's range and for his speech patterns and everything, and then to see what a different kind of actor would do with it, I think is really interesting as well.
Yeah, it'd be actually it'd be equally interesting if like Derek Jacobi played the weary elevator operator. And then he just turned up as the devil at the end. That would have been kind of great. Actually, I would have loved it if they'd done that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that'd be me if I had a slightly more, well, if I had more power certainly, but if I had a twisted enough sense of humour, I think, and I was them. I think at this point now, BAFTA winning Inside Number 9, going into episode number 7. I don't know. I'd get someone like Ian McKellen. And I'd say, oh, we love you. We really want you to be inside number 9, and have him just, do a cameo, do a walk on.
Oh, it'd be really fascinating to see. I guess their wish list of actors kind of evolves every series, really. But because obviously you'll have up and comers that they want to get on it, as well as kind of unknown finds, but as well as the proper legends. So it'd be really interesting to see what they have got on their list.
Yeah.
I thought one. It's funny you mentioned the pandemic. I thought. It was just interesting. I don't think this was baked into it exactly, but I think it was just sort of interestingly resonant. The fact that we've heard so much about support workers and frontline workers and key workers over the last year and a half, and just to have this one be this kind of very dark, intimate, kind of personal, kind of mostly two-hander in that sort of setting, in that caregiving setting. It seemed oddly kind of attuned to the mood at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just been in all our heads that kind of profession and that kind of job exists, and the strictures of it at the moment and everything. It's just that was a nice little feature of it. I think, whether it was intended to be or not.
Yeah. I think Reece Shearsmith's character is really interesting. Full stop. And I still haven't entirely unpicked it. I don't think. I know that he's based on like a 17th century clergyman called Urban Grandier, who was burnt basically for signing a pact with the devil. And you do, like, if you're watching Inside Number 9 and a nurse in the modern world walks in and says, "My name is Urban," you're like, okay, well, I'm going to Google that later. But I think what was really interesting, and it kind of makes sense when you get to the end, but is the way when he turns up at the beginning of the episode. What am I trying to say? When he walks in to look after Webster, he suddenly camps it up. He's not.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to talk about that.
He's not a camp character. He turns that on for Webster, and that left me kind of slightly wrong-footed all the way through. What's going on here? He's clearly not who he's purporting to be. And then certainly when he was looking through the case files, I just thought, oh, he's a relative out for revenge, and actually this has all been a plot to revenge a wrong on a lawyer who acquitted someone or put someone away. And
that's roughly where I'm terrible at guessing plots in advance, but that's roughly where I thought it was going. Yeah. What was that about? The sort of taking on the camp persona as the nurse? Is that just kind of implying that that's what people of Jacoby's generation think male nurses are? Or I didn't really,
I've no idea.
It was an odd touch, because obviously Reese, both of them have played very, very camp characters, if not explicitly queer. They've played very, very camp tinged characters throughout the career, and that just was such a deliberate choice. It wasn't really plot centric.
Yeah.
It's a weird one, wasn't it? And I don't think they addressed that in their show or anything.
No, and you get the ending, and you kind of go, well, it wasn't really necessary, other than I guess this idea of they're both not presenting each other with the real them. I think they're both wearing these masks. So Webster is wearing this mask of, actually, I'm playing you all the way through to try and get you in my place so that the devil takes you instead of me. And that's everything that he's doing from the beginning. You then know that is his super intention, as actors would call it, as Stanislavski would call it. It's your super intention that's overarching everything that you do. And then Shearsmith is playing a similar game. He, he's aware, I guess. I don't know, how much is he aware of that, the devil is going to come and take Webster, and actually he's safe because he's truly evil and he knows that he's already damned.
Well, I thought the sort of, maybe with that, the accent, the sort of voice being the strangest aspect, I thought the second strangest aspect of this was, as a choice, it sort of fit the heightened reality of it, but, when the devil turns up, when he takes his glasses off and you see his eyes, and I think he's just like, I can't remember exactly what he says, it's something like, oh, it's you, or, or like, he's very... He's shocked, but not, metaphysically taken aback.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're implying that something about looking in the devil's eyes just kind of brings you up to speed automatically on a sort of existential level, but, which is interesting. But there did seem to be a thing where he had that defense in his soul, I guess you might say. Like he knew ultimately what he was worth, and it's almost like he'd game planned if he ever was to meet the devil, how that would go. And it's kind of, I love that shot, by the way. We were talking about before about the direction, that at the end when Pemberton's got Shearsmith in the lift, and he decides that the exchange is no good, it is null and void, and it's that sort of
the switcheroo,
that was just so simple, wasn't it? I mean, not it is just a cut basically, but it just looked so great, it was like it looked like a magic trick, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the power of TV and editing, with people who know what they're doing. It's you can do incredibly impressive things relatively easily if you know what you're doing with a camera and an editing suite, and yeah, absolutely, that was just that, and that split second for you to catch up as well and go, well, hang on, Reece Shearsmith's suddenly on the other side, what's going on here, and it all kind of becoming clear. Although I think the first time I watched it, I was still a little bit muddled about what had actually happened. I think I followed the basic idea that Webster had tried to put Shearsmith in his place, and it hadn't worked. So I'd got that, but quite what the nuances of that legality were, I think, were slightly lost on me at the time. And then it became clearer to me that it was all to do with Shearsmith's inherent damnation and evil, that he's therefore not better than Webster or anyone.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? I was talking before about the sort of conventional Christian morality of it, and I suppose in a sense you could argue, couldn't you, that you kind of have to buy into that a little bit at face value to do a proper the devil comes to take your soul story where you don't defang that concept, the idea of damnation by, being what essentially was like a malicious kid, leading to tragic consequences. Killing someone deliberately, obviously at any age, is, should we say, not ideal. But it was the kind of face value idea that would result in, just inevitable damnation. Even at the end, he's not saved, is he? He's just like, yeah, you're going to get me later anyway. So there's
yeah,
I'm not an innocent soul, and I'll see you later. And the devil's like, yeah, you will. And I was just like, I thought it was interesting, again, like, because they have dabbled in quite a lot of moral grey areas and things over the course of the series, and it just kind of, this wasn't that really, which, again, as I say, that might just be inherent to the subgenre, basically.
Yeah, also I think the way that they'd played it felt much more like a fable. It felt much more like a legend or a myth. It sat very comfortably with the Faustus myth, and all the various incarnations of that. It felt very much like it was a very much hypothetical situation, which is, what happens when a man sells his soul in order to achieve some kind of greatness and glory. And it doesn't really have any real life morality to tell you, because it's all based around, Christian morality and good and evil. It's very Paradise Lost, isn't it? And I would suggest, or Jan Tregeagle, who is the Cornish version of the man who sold his soul to the
Milton.
No, Milton didn't write about Jan Tregeagle.
I thought you were going to say there was a Cornish Milton.
Oh, no. Jan Tregeagle is the Cornish equivalent of the Faustus myth, who sold his soul to the devil and then was damned for eternity to empty the water out of Dosmery Pool with a limpet shell with a hole in it.
You've not been working at the G7 summit, have you? This is all sounding very, very infused with the local area.
Yeah, no, I think Tregeagle was everyone's host. I think that was part of his punishment for selling his soul to the devil, was to spend a weekend in St Ives with, what should we call them? Those folks.
The simple folks. Okay, well, we'll take a break there, and then we'll come back and talk about the finale episode of the series, Last Night of the Proms, and then before we go, we will revisit our series rankings. So see you all in a bit.
Now, Faustus, let thine eye with horror stare into that vast perpetual torture house. There are the Furies, tossing damned souls on burning forks, their bodies boiling lead, yet ne'er can die, but yet all these things are nothing, thou shalt see.
No, I've seen enough to torture me.
Nay, thou must feel them! Taste the smart of all! He that loves pleasure must for pleasure fall.
It strikes. Now, body, turn to air, or Lucifer will bear thee quick to hell. Your soul be changed into small water drops, and fall into the ocean and ne'er be found. My God, look not so fierce on me. Adders and serpents, let me breathe a while. No ugly hell, gape not. Come not, Lucifer. I'll burn my books. Mephistopheles.
Welcome back. So, John, we're going to discuss episode 6 of series 6 of Inside Number 9. That's Last Night of the Proms, which was on. I mean, that aired for the first time just a couple of nights ago. We're recording on the Wednesday now. It was on the Monday. I've watched it. I think about 3 times, because I definitely need to go back for this one because there was such a lot to talk about. I think. I mean, this, people who know me, at all well know that I'm a bit of a politics nerd, and that I saw the sort of pre-publicity for this one, and I saw that it was, it looked like it was about people watching last night at the Proms, and it was festooned with Union Jacks, and I knew that they'd do something interesting with that. I didn't know whether it was going to be good or not. I didn't know whether I'd like it or not. I'll save a bit of that for later. But I knew it was going to be one that would be worth watching, and I hoped it would be a suitable, at least for me, a suitable finale for it. What did you think?
I'm going to take the coward's way out. I'm going to ask you what you thought first.
Well, I kind of... I'm not going to spoil it where my placement of it is, but I liked it, actually. I liked the gonzo craziness of it. I liked the way that music is used in it. Because one of my favourites is Empty Orchestra. Mm-hmm. I think I described it as my favourite. So this was doing some of the same stuff of kind of turning the episode into a quasi musical in the way it was scoring every bit. But around a realistic musical bonding experience, basically, that people do. So that I liked that element, the Empty Orchestra element. I thought it was. I thought the politics in it was interesting, insofar as there was straightforward contemporary politics in it, because there was a bit, and there was obviously some wider ranging stuff. Could I ask? We're gonna play chicken the entire night now, just trying to not properly discuss the episode and our feelings about it with each other. Can I ask you maybe simpler question, but maybe one for maybe interesting for our American and other parts of the world listeners? Have you ever watched Last Night at the Proms?
I don't think I've ever watched it all the way through. No, I'm certainly aware of it, and I've watched some proms, and I've been to a few proms, and they're wonderful things. That's not my upbringing.
Yeah, mine neither.
That's not my demographic. That's not where I'm from. I've never had that influence on me. Classical music is something I've discovered for myself relatively late in life. I've never had it. I've never had it given to me as a legacy or a heritage, or here is what music is, here is what art is. So I'm obviously aware of it, and obviously we're all aware of it and the controversy it can cause at the moment, based on last Night at the Proms. So no, I don't think I've ever watched it all the way through. So from that perspective, it was interesting in the way that they framed that, and I got to experience someone else's tradition. I saw it a bit weirdly. I know they refer to it as Eurovision because of all the European flags, but given that Eurovision was only a few weeks ago, that's much more my speed is watching Eurovision every year rather than the Last Night at the Proms, and I'm not sure what that says about anything. But
it's interesting that obviously a lot of nationalistic, patriotic people will also watch Eurovision, but primarily you might say from countries around Europe. But it's it's interesting to contrast something like that Last Night at the Proms with Eurovision, isn't it? As a sort of shared television ritual.
Yeah.
Those are interesting. I can equally imagine them doing a great Eurovision episode, for example. I was actually thinking, it's funny you said Last Night at the Proms, it wasn't your kind of introduction to classical music or anything like that. I think my nearest to that was probably Fantasia, actually. Which is another way to kind of get pop culture and infusion of classical music when you're young, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always been. I wouldn't even say it's been alienating to me, Last Night at the Proms, because it was never shoved down my throat, and it wasn't something my family gathered to watch. I think. So to start to nibble on the sides of the episode a little bit, there's one bit in it where Steve Pemberton's character is talking about. They're talking about the difference between Englishness and Britishness.
Yeah.
And he kind of makes he does like a little Scottish impersonation, and then does a Welsh impression, which, as bad Welsh impersonations tend to do, turns a bit Pakistani, which he comments on. I like that there was a little nod to Englishness not being the same as Britishness, but being terribly, terribly mixed up in it. With the Union Jack and everything like that. I think that's interesting because to speak, you're saying you're from the southwest of England. I'm from the north of England, but I'm also half Scottish. So it's been a very, as I've touched on in some of these other podcasts, it's been a very confusing time in general to be a half English, half Scottish person, especially over the last decade. I thought. Where to start? Okay, so Steve Pemberton's character in Last Night at the Proms, I really enjoyed, because I think these are. You were talking about some of these episodes are like drawing on kind of a fable-like simplicity in some ways, and this. Well, I mean, the more appropriate word for this might be parable, as we go into it a little bit more. But these characters are more explicitly than in some of the other episodes like types in a way, aren't they? And they're deliberately created, you can tell, as types.
Yeah.
And Pemberton is the kind of classic. I guess he's not portrayed as a man with any real thought through politics. He just enjoys the pomp, tradition, and family togetherness of the Proms as an event, as opposed to his wife, played by, was it Sarah Parish in this?
Yeah.
Who is political, who has political thoughts and argues with Reece Shearsmith's character about contemporary British politics, particularly. Does anyone actually say Brexit in the episode? I'm not sure if the word.
No, I don't think they do actually.
Yeah, which is probably wise to not date it too much, isn't it? I don't think this is going any. The Brexit arguments are going anywhere anytime quick, but you could watch this probably in 10 years and get the kind of jingoism and kind of cultural traditions it's talking about, even if the specific moment has passed.
Yeah,
which is probably smart. What did you think of the way that they wove kind of like quite believable contemporary political bickering into the kind of into the plot?
I'm going to go back a bit actually, and what you said about types, I think that slightly unlocks what I think about it, in that they were playing with very strong types. They were playing with archetypes, in fact, I felt.
Do you think in a weird way that takes it back full circle to Wuthering Heist?
In a way, yeah. In a way, it does. Different type of. This is a classic mystery play, isn't it? Really. You're going back to a medieval Christian mystery cycle where you have the faithful, you have the doubting, and all of those other archetypes that I'm not really well versed in to tell you about. But the issue with that is that by the end, I think maybe I was looking too hard for their meaning. The simple fact of the son drinking and throwing up, it's like, okay, what are you saying? What are you saying?
I know what you mean. I was looking into stuff like that as well. You're trying to get a meaning out of absolutely everything.
Yeah, that and that drove me slightly nuts the first time. What does it say that this middle class woman kind of rubbed herself up against a random stranger who may or may not be an immigrant? What does it say?
Should we just, by the way, before we go further, should we just call him the stranger?
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to put it, isn't it?
I think you're right, actually. So what did it all mean? I felt like it was, I was looking for something Brechtian. I was looking for them to be, holding signs up that made everything clear about, why the kid was throwing up. I mean, they end up wrapping the body in a Union Jack, for God's sake. It's, they're not being subtle about anything here. But
at the same time, though, they are being quite interestingly diffuse, I thought. It's funny, actually, because I've been deliberately avoiding reviews with this, because I knew I was going to talk to you about it, and I wanted to kind of not be parroting them, but also not be kind of taking too strongly against them if I saw a review that annoyed me or anything like that. But I did see a bit of chat online in sort of Facebook groups and fan groups and the like about a very common perception for this finale seemed to be people quite self-effacingly or self-deprecatingly being like, well, that was interesting. I'm not sure if I got it. It might have been a bit clever for me, and words to that effect, but they didn't hate it. That seemed to be the most typical thing, was people were kind of, without throwing. Obviously, some people were rejecting it and stuff, but that seemed to be more the kind of average mood.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? But you do start second guessing the writers at that point. The first time round, I was like, I think maybe I'm missing the point that they're making. The first time, I think maybe I'm missing the point that they're making here. Maybe I don't get it. Maybe it's too subtle for me. And I thought, I've thought about this one a lot. I will say this is the episode I've thought about the most from this series. But I'm beating around the bush here, but I didn't enjoy it, and I have a lot of issues with it, and I think a lot of it was quite badly judged, and I think if it if it has any kind of political point to make, I think it's made very clumsily, and doesn't do anything for any kind of debate to be had. Whereas they're normally very good, or historically they are very good at seeding quite complex conversations and alluding to them and saying, well, this is for you to think about, and maybe we'll comment on this one way or the other. Like should television programs deal with real life tragedies, etc., things like that. I think it was just, and it was genuinely shocking. The ending with, the almost ending with Julian Glover. Spoilers, obviously, everyone. Julian Glover stabbing him with a pitchfork. But at that point, I was just like, I don't know, and I can't articulate it well enough. So I need to think about this a lot longer. But right from the off, I felt that having that character of the stranger who had no real dialogue for a perfectly rational reason, but he had no agency. Everything that happened to him, and the three things that happened to him were: a middle-aged woman rubbed herself up against
sexually assaulted him,
and then her husband also sexually assaulted him when he's frisking him, and then he was stabbed. And I just don't think they got away with it, I'm afraid.
Right. I'm so glad you've got that reaction to it, because I'm in some ways surprised I liked this as much as I did. And some of that, we can actually, that tonal stuff, we'll talk a bit about that and some of the specifics. But I generally, like I was saying with my politics nerdery, sometimes things engaging with political issues can be catnip to me. But I think quite more often than not, it puts me on guard, and I kind of have this kind of, don't do that, don't say that, don't simplify things to that extent. Oh, that line, you think you're being clever with that line, but you're not, that kind of thing. And I felt twinges of that, the line Shearsmith has about, it's like slugs voting for more salt, and stuff like that. And it was just kind of, and it's kind of because that's the sort of thing I've seen on a million Facebook threads and stuff like that. It was interesting. Right, so you know what? I don't feel there's any cogent way to discuss this episode. There might be. We'll go back to some of it. I'll continue circling it for now. I was saying before I was going to discuss like the sort of choices made in this about sort of sexuality and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. What does it? The fact that Reece Shearsmith's character is not just is a closeted gay man in this.
Yeah.
And he's a frustrated Remainer. We might as well just say it, right? That seems to be the way they're characterizing him. And he's actually a murderously frustrated Remainer. In the end, in a bit that I thought was like odd to the point of not working really. What's going on there? Because all right. So I'll unpack that a bit. So the homosexuality and a very particular sort of I guess you might say like traditional Middle England type of homosexuality where it is hidden and it's about going to the gym a bit too much and things like that. It's about kind of hiding it from your wife. It's that kind of thing. He's not like a modern liberated gay man character. He's that kind of gay character. And as I say, it's coupled with this sort of murderous frustration that needs to be unleashed at the end. Is that regressive? Is that simplistic? Is that playing into stereotypes of Remainers? What is that?
Well, I think what they were doing there actually was one of the more interesting things for me, where they had these two sides of the argument that they set up very clearly from the off of Reece Shearsmith being the Remainer and Steve Pemberton and his wife being the Brexiteers, clearly. And it became clear within the first 10 minutes or so that actually the couple that you'd want to spend time with would be the Brexiteers, because they're nicer, they're more fun, they're kind to each other, they're kind to other people, and I thought that was what they were doing, was they were trying to flip that argument and go, okay, we know that most of the people watching Inside Number 9 on, scare quotes, the left-leaning BBC are probably going to be more likely in the Remain camp than they are in the Leave camp. So we're going to do something quite interesting with that, where we're going to make the Brexiters slightly more humane. We're going to make them more sympathetic, and see what that does to your opinions. And we will go far, eventually we will go far the other way by making the people that you may agree with politically, you know, just absolutely fucked up, murderous, and sexually frustrated, and not in touch with their own personalities. And I felt like that was an interesting start, but I feel like they had way too much stuff in the mix of this to make any kind of coherent sense of any of it.
Well, Pemberton, I agree, is a nice character, and, you know, we all know a bunch of people, you know, whether they're, you know, whether they voted Remain or Leave, whether they didn't vote at all, you know, whether left or right nominally. We know a bunch of people who aren't that political in our lives, and they just have a great time with the rituals that they're into. I mean, that's the thing, is Pemberton might be a nice character, but he is kind of a childlike one in a way, isn't he? Like, he's kind of a lovable idiot. And I'd sort of fight back on, you know, even just as a character, whatever your position, like, I'd fight back on the idea that his wife is portrayed as a nice character. You know, I mean, she's spiky and argumentative to the point of, you know, alienating, I guess, however rude they're being to her. You know, she's not exactly a turn the other cheek type, is she?
Yeah, no, she's not. But they give her moments. So they give her the moment during the forgive me for not knowing what the Home Sweet Home tune is actually called, but when the Proms are doing Home Sweet Home, and you know, her dad is clearly moved, and it's the first time she's seen him genuinely moved in a while, and she is moved, and there's this lingering shot of her kind of looking around her home, and that I think the writers and the director have given her more of that. I didn't see that happening with any other characters, where they were using filmic technique and writing to draw me into someone's perhaps more complicated worldview, yet they were doing that with her. Sure, she has her moments where she's spiky and horrible, but I think probably more than Penny, I think your sympathies lie with her more than they do with Penny, who's essentially just sexually assaulted someone in a conservatory.
I mean, what did you talk about Julian Glover's character, who's almost like a sort of Father Jack level kind of non sequitur generating machine? You know, and he's if this is a play of types and archetypes and sort of British, like contemporary British types, I might say, it's interesting, isn't it? Because such a lot's been said about, you know, older voters and their effect of Brexit. Not that everyone old voted Brexit or indeed voted at all, but, you know, that's the part the myth of the old plays in the sort of Brexit legend, I guess. You know, it's interesting to have the only kind of pensioner character be out of his mind, essentially, isn't it? Like, you know, like I mean, completely detached from the conversation.
Yeah, and detached from reality, but reality can still get through and move him. But, you know, we don't know anything really about him. He's empty. He's a shell. He's a cipher for us as an audience. I mean, you know, we could go into the fact that you know, a man of that age who has a house that big in that area of the country has lived a certain type of life. I think what was more interesting for me is that it was coming straight after Jacoby. You know, it was coming straight after we'd seen, frankly, a firework display from Jacoby, and you think, oh, Julian Glover's up next, and, you know, they just have him barking obscenities for 28 minutes, and you know, it's important that you get the right act for that, and you get the best act for that, and obviously, you know, it's a very hard thing to get right and an easy thing to get wrong. But part of me did feel a bit bad for Julian Glover, if I'm honest.
I told you, didn't I, that I'd mixed up Julian Glover with Julian Bleach when I was actually watching the episode, so I thought that was Davros. Because, I mean, he was chair-bound and, barking stuff out, and I was like, having the kind of optics, if you like, of having Davros be a character in this play about Brexit, it would be interesting. But, I apologise to Julian Glover, and indeed Julian Bleach, because I know they both listen. It was... I'm really interested that, that you found this one kind of... like a failed experiment, basically, because I don't really think it was, and I think it was one of the more interesting episodes of the series. Although I guess you might not disagree with that second statement.
No, I probably don't disagree with that statement. And like I say, I think it's keeping me thinking. It's sticking with me, and I'm still trying to unpack it. And I'm not repulsed by it or offended by it. But I don't know. I'm trying to figure out why it hasn't worked for me, and what about it doesn't land. It's almost, it is an interesting experiment, and I'd like to kind of take it apart and see if there are bits that they could have done differently. And I think the conceit as well, the conceit of it being last night at the Proms, and everything being soundtracked by what's going on in real time in last night at the Proms, I think that's genius. I think that's absolute genius. That's that's right up my street. But then to just, I don't know if it's the immigrant angle that I find so. I don't consider myself particularly prudish or squeamish, but there's just something about it that kind of thinks, and I sort of think I'm not the person to unpack this, because listeners can probably tell from my voice mostly what I look like and what my demographic is, but I just feel slightly uncomfortable about the way that character was treated across the board from beginning to end, and I can't get past that.
Yeah. Nor should you. I mean, can I give you? And I really want to. I always feel awkward for someone who's so into politics. I always feel a bit awkward talking about politics in these regards, not just when it's on mic, but just kind of putting forward an opinion about this kind of stuff, I guess. But let me run forward one possible interpretation of this to you, just to not to get your agreement on it or anything, but just this is something that occurred to me when I was watching it. I think particularly on rewatch, actually. That one argument in kind of left-wing, I was going to say Labour Party politics in Britain, but also kind of just left-wing thought in general in contemporary Britain, is that the movement of Corbynism, offered a moment of kind of social change and restored social democracy and, like gateway socialism, you might say. And that was brought down in, the sort of fulcrum of Brexit by both Brexiteers, soft or hard, and by, I guess you might say, like liberal Remainers, who had different priorities. That's a dominant strand of thought in the Labour Party about what happened in the 2019 general election and before that. I thought one way to look at this, in the sense that portrayals of Jesus have always, they've often taken on if you're to invoke Jesus and like the real quote unquote Jesus coming back to kind of teach the contemporary world a lesson, it's often about getting back to values, isn't it, and kind of restoring humanitarian values when the compass has gone awry, essentially. I thought you could, if you're a really hardcore Corbynista, or just someone who's gutted that Labour didn't win the last general election, or in any of that spectrum, I thought you could definitely look at this as a parable about the failure of left-wing politics in the last decade, because these people are all very angry at each other and all arguing about different things and are ignoring, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it, of this sort of thing where they're ignoring the Messiah in their midst, and indeed, this is where I want to be very clear. I'm not saying this is I'm not saying this is how I feel about Corbynism, let alone Jeremy Corbyn. But if you're to take that stand in there, they collaborate in destroying that possibility, don't they? So they're there. That's one thing. That's one way you could read it, I think. I don't think that Shearsmith and Pemberton's, I don't think either of them are very outspoken about politics. I don't really know much about their personal politics. I doubt that's them, personally. But that's one way you could read it, I think. And it's one of the ways in which I could make most sense of Shearsmith joining in with the stabbing, essentially, because that happens quite abruptly, just on an action level. And it sort of happens... The only way I can make that make sense is if he's a frustrated Remainer, and obviously Remainers have a right to be frustrated because they lost the referendum. But if him lashing into violence, the only way I can make that make sort of metaphorical sense is if it's violence against other political avenues. I guess that's all I could get out of it, really. Thoughts?
Yeah, that's quite plausible. That's one reading of it. I don't think that's a radical interpretation of the text. I think that's there if you want it. But again, I just don't feel like those. It gets to the stabbing. It gets to the final stabbing, and I just think if that is your agenda, if that is the point that you're making, then you've got to make it a damn sight better than having me wondering why this character is stabbing this other character and just kind of going, this feels wrong and I don't get it and I don't understand why you've made them do that.
I think some of the point it might have been reaching for is less complicated and is more just the kind of thing that you probably think's very clever when you hear it as a teenager for the first time, where it's, Jesus was from the Middle East. Jesus was a Middle Eastern guy. It's like, that's both true, if the historical Jesus existed, and a bit banal, but it's often used as, to point out the truth of, to deflate anti-immigrant sentiments, isn't it, when you see them being espoused by the sort of people who might enjoy waving flags at last night at the proms.
Yeah.
In some cases, I'm being so careful here not to generalise too much.
Absolutely, and
more careful than the episode, I think.
Jerusalem itself is problematic. It's it's not an easy poem or an easy song to talk about nowadays. There is an interesting point though, which actually they brought up in the podcast, which is that part of that myth comes from Joseph of Arimathea, who is Jesus' dad, allegedly, because he was a miner, ended up in Cornwall, of all places. He ended up in Cornwall for the tin. And this is...
I knew you were going to bring it back to Cornwall.
Yeah, and this is the theory. This is a pure Cornish episode, folks. And this is the theory why Jesus may have ended up in Britain at some point, because he was travelling around with his dad, who apparently was working in the tin mines. Hang on a minute. My dad worked in the tin mines. Wait a second, David.
Wow, yeah. And you are currently walking on water.
Yeah. I don't have any satisfying answers, and maybe that's a good thing, and I like my art to be ambiguous and challenging, and maybe that's a good thing. That I've got an episode of Inside Number 9 that doesn't sit well with me and I can't quite get my head around. And there's one argument to say, you're asking too much of it. It's a half-hour TV show. As we've said before, at its best, it's what I would consider to be great art, but at its least, it's just half an hour of TV.
The ending where Reece Shearsmith's character's wife is embraced by this sort of risen stranger, shall we say, in kind of, it's kind of shot in a way that it's all a bit hazy, isn't it? And it's you start to see things through a veil, kind of thing. I wondered what that actually made me think of a little bit, because we talked about the sexuality in the episode and stuff. Is the kind of Like a Prayer, the Madonna video, where. Because she's been defined in this episode as like a woman who is not with the right kind of sexual partner and is not getting sexual satisfaction. There's a lot of jokes in it about that. Mm-hmm. And to pair her both earlier in the episode and at the end with the stranger is playing around with that kind of, the sexual Jesus kind of imagery that subversive artists sometimes do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's that heritage as well. It's there. That's Last Temptation of Christ and the controversy that causes, any kind of sexualization of the Christ figure, is, you're asking for trouble.
Beyond all the sexualisation of the Christ figure that churches do.
Sure, of course, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But apart from that, the wrong kind of sexualisation. I've just remembered one of the things I wanted to say about Brian and Penny actually is there's actually there's another moment in it, and it's before any of this really kicks off, when I can't remember where they are in the Proms, but he, Brian is standing up and everything, things are starting to get a bit fractious, and there's a point where he pushes Penny, like it's a split second, but he clearly pushes her down to the floor.
Yeah,
and it's really horrible. It's a really horrible moment. It's this man is not just kind of comically a repressed homosexual, and he's drinking too much, and he's a snob, and he wants everyone to be singing "Rule Britannia," and making it declamatory rather than a statement. But actually, he's an arsehole. And
a domestic abuser. It's indicated,
yeah, absolutely,
quite casually,
yeah.
No, it's a nasty episode in many ways. I think I was thinking about why I like this one. We'll go to sort of our series ranking in a second, but I think it might be. Do you remember at the very start of this treatment of Series 6, I was saying I basically wanted it to show me something that I hadn't seen before, and I think this one came through for me in a way that I think, like, as I was saying, like sort of like Empty Orchestra-esque kind of communal musical soundtracking of kind of contemporary British politics and society, social kind of vision. Mm-hmm. That's not something they've done, and I think this was the most of a departure for me, and I think that alone was going to get it considered amongst my sort of top episodes of the series. And I think the fact that because I'm still mulling it over as well, and I think even just talking to you about it, there's bits that sit less well with me, or just remaining elements of dissatisfaction about some of the plot beats and stuff that I'm not getting yet. But I think it is. I'm so glad we went out an episode like that where I am thinking like that. I think that shows good judgment on their part, where they left you with a thinker, essentially.
Yeah.
However successfully executed, rather than one that was quite. Because I think How Do You Plead would have been a strong closer too, but that, as we said, despite the sort of dark horror sting in its tail, it is just basically quite a conventional, as I say, like Tales of the Unexpected kind of thing. This is something a bit different, as I say, a bit gonzo, a bit out there for them, really.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it would have made more sense. I wonder how tempted they were. I mean, that's you're in kind of harrowing territory, aren't you? Really, you're in, you're in a. That would be traditional for them to end with kind of the big gothic horror number in many respects. So yeah, it's a surprise. You're absolutely right. I'm not going to dispute that at all. It's definitely a surprise. It's definitely something we haven't seen them do before. I think it's definitely pushing boundaries of I slightly hesitate to say taste, because that does make me sound like a prude, but I think they're really pushing. They pushed me, definitely, in terms of whether I felt that this was something I wanted presented to me as entertainment. Again, scare quotes. And, whether it had broader points to make, and if so, did it make those points well, or did it make them at all? So it's definitely, they've done something new, and yep, that's absolutely to be applauded. But I don't just want to be I love these guys, they can do no wrong, because I still don't feel comfortable with
Yeah.
I just don't feel comfortable with that episode. And I know you were saying that one of the arguments is how, they're all involved in the violence, they're all turning on him. Well, they're not, though. The situation is inflamed purely and simply because the senile patriarch arguably sees a threat that isn't there because he's not lucid, and kills him with a pitchfork. And again, because of the way they've been set up as archetypes, I guess I spent the whole time kind of going, well, what does this mean? Who are you saying are the murderers? What are you saying here? Who is the archetype that's responsible for this?
I agree, that's unclear, and
I
would kind of love to hear more from Pemberton and Shisworth on that. But equally, I'm quite happy just letting it stew in my own head a bit. Yeah, no, I'm actually going to... I think it's one of the episodes I'm actually going to be really interested in kind of hearing from other people over the next few weeks, what they thought of it as well. And I think their different political choices and stances might factor into that a bit. Anyway, we could blather about this one all night, but I'd like to revisit our Series 6 rankings now that we've seen all 6 of them, because I've got one worked out here. I actually cut out a bit of paper. I cut them all out because I was shifting them around quite a lot this afternoon. And I think... I think I've got my 6 now. Would you like me to reveal my my 6?
Yeah. Okay. Go on. Go with your.
Okay.
Tell you what. Go with your bottom 3, and I'm going to go with my bottom 3.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Yeah. There was quite a lot of shifting around because I've basically been readjusting it ever since we last recorded. So when episode 4 came out, I was like, okay, that roughly goes there. And then episode 5 came out, I was like, okay, I think that was the toughest. I think that was the toughest to place at the time. And this one, I've done a lot of going back, and this one has swung around a bit. But I'll let you know where I'm going. So okay, so I've got. So my at number 6, I've got Simon Says. At number 5, I've got Hurry Up and Wait. And at number 4, I've got How Do You Plead?
Okay, that is interesting. Because you'll possibly be unsurprised after the last 15 minutes to hear that I've put Last Night at the Proms at the bottom. Mm-hmm. That's my 6th one. My number 5 is also How Do You Plead?
Oh no, my number 5 was Hurry Up and Wait.
Oh, okay. My number 4 is Hurry Up and Wait. So just they're the other way around. So my 6 is Last Night at the Proms, 5 is How Do You Plead, 4 is Hurry Up and Wait.
Okay, cool. So we'll both do our number 3. My number 3 was Wuthering Heist.
Lip Service.
Uh-huh. Okay, my number 2 was actually Last Night of the Proms.
My number 2 is Wuthering Heist.
Interesting. So by process of elimination, my number 1 remains Lip Service, and actually I was wondering about this because that was my top of the 3. When only 3 were out. I think just briefly, and not to go over that again, but it's both kind of quite straightforward, I guess, but there's so many nice touches in it that we commented on. I think the twist is sharp enough and unexpected enough and throws new light on the happenings of the entire episode to really work on repeated viewing as well. And I guess I really enjoyed kind of the Pemberton in it. I enjoyed Sean Clifford in it, and I kind of enjoyed, we commented at the time, but Reece Dismas kind of not completely beside the point, but kind of just enjoyably silly performance as the hotelier, So I think that's the one. That's my number 1. So your number 1 would be
Simon Says.
Simon Says.
One. Yeah.
That's so interesting that's my bottom 1 and that's your top 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wondered if that divide was going to stay. Yeah. Do you just briefly again? Then do you want to speak in defence of that?
I think the thing about Simon Says is I just think they're lovely twists. I think they're lovely, and and I know I spoke a lot about the credulity of it, and a friend did mention to me that I'd used the word credulity an awful lot in the last podcast, which is absolutely the case. But it just lots of factors coming together. I think that nearly 1 minute shot of him being smothered, I think, is genuinely brave, exciting TV. I think the whole idea of TV fandom and how it can go wrong, and how the creator starts as the victim but by the end is very much the aggressor. I think that was all interesting. The length that fans will go to. I really liked the other nerd character who was the kind of naive, I'm going along with this. This is a great idea. This is going to get us both famous and to be friends with you. And to then just be, horribly killed twice, quite frankly. 3 times, if you count. Like, that guy dies 3 times in that episode. there's a lot there that I really enjoyed and really worked for me. So yeah, I don't know what that says that I really liked. Simon says and can't get my head around last night at the Proms.
I think I was just doing a quick totting up in terms of we didn't really agree like a scoring system or anything like that. But I think, but if you just do a straightforward thing where our first place gets 6 points, our second place gets 5 points, the kind of most straightforward scoring system you can do. I think in terms of like aggregating our two choices, but our strongest episodes of the season were either Lip Service or Wuthering Heist. It was kind of a dead heat basically.
Okay.
Yeah, so that feels right. That feels and I do like the ones we disagreed and not disagreed. That's a bit strong, but I do like the ones that genuinely hit us both quite differently. That feels quite fruitful, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of the purpose of doing this. There's no point in us both just agreeing with each other.
Yeah.
Although that's nice too.
That is lovely, isn't it? Yeah, we should try that for a bit.
Yeah, I did want to say as well, my friend who told me that I'd use the word credulity too much. He's also someone who's not seen an awful lot of Inside Number 9, and their quote to me was this was actually on, they watched Tom and Jerry, and that was one of the episodes that they had watched, and they sums it up to me by saying I was waiting for the punchline, and instead I got punched in the face. And actually, I think as a summary of many episodes of Inside Number 9. I think that actually works quite well.
Yeah, no, they should put that on the box set. Well, John, it's been a pleasure, as always. Thanks for coming back and talking about that series, and I'd love to talk to you about the 7th series when it emerges, probably in 2022, I'd hope. And hopefully have you back on the 2nd series of the EscapeGoat podcast to talk about a myriad other things as well. So, thanks for joining me.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Lovely stuff. And everyone, once again, this is the end of the first series of the EscapeGoat podcast. Continue to keep an eye on all the feeds and everything. Obviously, if you listen to this in the future, beyond autumn, just go for the next episode. But until then, until autumn 2021, re-listen to all the other ones. And
Can I come back as the previously on the EscapeGoat podcast for the beginning of season 2? Can I do the recap?
Yeah, but just it's my one proviso is it has to be completely nonsensical. Like it's just nothing. Everything you say is nothing that featured on any of the episodes at all.
Look who you're talking to. When have I ever knowingly made sense?
Sometimes we get the heralds we deserve. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks again, John.
Pleasure.
And see you all soon.
See you soon. Stay safe, everyone.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat Podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @deep_Fagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.